Curse of Shadows and Thorns, a romantic fairy tale fantasy by L.J. Andrews. Chapter 1. I'd stayed too long, but truth be told, I couldn't find the will to leave. Not yet. This was my time to pretend I was someone else, someone with a life beyond the controls and demands of others. The thud of a heavy body cracked over the greasy floorboards of the game hall. A few grunts preceded the roar of curses to the gods, as if his drunkenness had been their fault. A grin curled over my mouth. One I promptly hid behind my cards. So, no sense in drawing attention to myself when I was the one in the game hall breaking the law. Corman, the watchman, had knocked out his front tooth when he landed him onto the floor of the body game hall. Spiced red spilled from the ewer over Corman's woolen gambeson, pasting his hand of cards to his chest like badges of honor. He dabbed his mouth, bemused. At the sight of blood on his dirty fingertips, he cursed more than once, then followed it with an eruption of laughter. I scooted over as Halvor, a stable man from the estate, leaned over to clasp Corman's hand. "Up you go," Halvor said, and clapped the shaky night watchman on the back. Corman fumbled back into his seat at the table. An eel fisherman slammed a new horn of spiced red in front of the man, then barked a laugh as Corman drained it so quickly the drops dribbled down his russet beard onto the table. "Had enough?" Halvor asked. "Carry on," Corman said, words slurred, lips pink with blood. The game went on as though nothing had delayed it to begin with. Halvor lifted his eyes to my side of the table. The deep brown reminded me of roasted chestnuts, and sometimes the flash of unusual light in his gaze left me wondering if he might have had a bit of nightfolk in his blood. He didn't have the pronounced point to his ear, but according to Faelor, some could conceal their true natures with their fury, the magic of the earth and of illusion. If the stable hand had magic, then no doubt Halvor would keep his head down, not only drink idly in his game halls. King Zyben had a proclivity to magically bind nightfolk, then send them to his executioner. I hoped Halvor wasn't Fae. I liked him too much, and nightfolk were known to be ruthless. I tugged on the brim of my napless cap and dragged my hand to the back of my neck to ensure my braid remained tucked underneath. I was a little discomposed the way his gaze lingered too long. Halvor didn't recognize me. I repeated in my head for the 100th time. Why would he? I was of little importance at the estate. Halvor's sun-toasted skin still had smudges from the day's work, but every man in the game hall smelled of unwashed skin, old fish, and topped with a bit of brine from being so near the Fates ocean. The exact reason I'd patted my moonlight pale cheeks in soil before sneaking into the game hall. "Boy," Halvor said through a drink of his own, "play or be played." My grip tightened around my playing cards. The two missing fingertips on my left hand made them harder to hold. But I didn't let on as I fanned out each card. Unskilled as I was at the game, I'd watched enough Monte tricks and gambles in town to know I had a decent hand. Shoulders slouched, bared away from the men at the table, I played 3 golden axes painted on the bent, yellowed cards. The eel fisherman groaned and cursed the trickster god as he tossed his hand down. Corman had already become lost in his cups again and didn't notice. A financier at the trade docks balked and countered my play with 2 gold axes and 3 black wolven. Halvor chuckled. "Piss poor luck, boy." My heart thumped in my chest. Don't play it. Don't draw attention. "Wait," I said in the deepest voice I could manage. It sounded ridiculous. Never was I more grateful for the amount of ale passed around since no one seemed to notice in their haze. Call it pride, but I couldn't resist and slammed down the card I'd hoarded all evening. The Battling Crowns. One blood red, one black as a starless sky. Crowns trump Wolven. Before my hand left the pile of cards once more, Corman found himself on his back when the table erupted in shouts of counting cards, of tricks and schemes and cheats. Halvin's eyes brightened as he burst out of his seat, his fist colliding with a tradesman in a boisterously patterned suit, though the man had nothing to do with our game. The stable hand laughed as he'd waited all night for this moment, then leapt into a tussle between the eel fisherman, the financier, and a bulky brute from the docks. I dropped the last of my cards and ducked beneath the tables, scurrying toward the back of the game hall. Glass shattered. Wood on wood scraped over the floors as chairs and tables were tossed. Cracks of knuckles on jaws. Laughter. Always laughter. As the warrior and raider blood of these people burst into yet another fight. The first of the evening, but surely not the last. As I crept past the counter, the aleman took in the scuffle. His shoulders slumped, and I thought I heard him mutter, "Here we go," under his breath, before he grabbed a wooden rod and lunged into the tangle of fists. How dull life would have been without respite eve at the dock shanties. The once-a-week night when serfs and laborers were afforded a few hours of fun. With chaos at my back, I used my shoulder to shove through the door, but smashed into another body. I squeaked my surprise, then quickly remembered I was meant to be a sturdy boy, uninjured at the local blacksmith, rough and unafraid. My eyes raced enough to note the polished boots and merchant's belt. A wealthier man. "Apologies, Herr," I muttered deep and low. "No apologies," he returned, pausing for a breath. "Dehan." I froze. He had addressed me as a female. My hand whipped the back of my neck again, but the plaits of my braid were still tucked beneath my cap. He leaned forward, his skin like the spice of the forest. "Not to worry," he whispered. "I'm good with secrets." I fumbled for the coin purse tucked in the trousers I'd stolen from the uniform closet back home. The man placed a hand on my arm. A shudder danced down my spine. I didn't look up, afraid he'd pieced together my face beneath the dirt and the oil smudges all over my nose. "Are you paying for my silence?" I swallowed the scratch in my throat. "Doesn't everybody in Millstrand?" He chuckled, a sound I felt in my bones. "True. Even still, keep your shame for another day, Dehan." With that, he strode toward the debauchery and the game hall. I stole a glance over my shoulder. My throat tightened at the sight of him. 3 hells I was a fool. Legan Gray. The face I'd hoped to see all night, and now he'd caught me. Would he recognize me? Tell my father? All gods. Would he tell the king? The dark gold of his hair, the broad shape of his shoulders, hands that looked too rough to be merchant. All of Legan had become the most recognizable attributes in Lower Mellstrand Township. Rumors filtered through high society about Legan. Most suspected him to be the son of some noble family from one of the exotic kingdoms beyond the horizon. Others thought him to be half Timoran and half Eton. I favored the theory. His hair was paler like Timoran's, my people, but his skin and eyes glimmered with the unique dark shade of Eton's, the people mine enslaved during the raids. Since his name gained prestige nearly a turn ago, Legan Gray had made a mark among veteran merchants for his ability to negotiate financials for the wealthy, but more so among desperate mothers aiming to convince the handsome stranger to take 1 or even 2 of their daughters. He was intriguing, nothing more. and I had no desire to speak to the man. Doubtless, I'd be as invisible to him as I was to everyone else. Before he let the door shut, Legan looked back at me. A curl tugged at the corner of his mouth. Then he disappeared into the game hall. When my heart stopped racing, I adjusted my cap and turned down a narrow alley. Millstrand docks were always coated in a fine layer of brine and seagrass. It reeked of oysters, eel, and exotic fish caught in the precarious reefs far out to the sea. The dock shanties were made of tenants and old shacks that leaned from turns of sea storms. Here the lampposts were chipped and rusted, mud pulled over cracked cobblestones. Here, folks spent most of their miserly incomes at game halls, alehouses, and brothels. Here is where I was free. I lifted the collar of my jacket and ducked into an arcade when a trio of Ravenspire guards rounded onto the street. Castle Ravenspire often sent more patrols after the midnight tolls, likely looking for eaten folk who breathed wrong to indenture and shipped to the brutal quarries in the High Court. In the shadows, I shot a quick prayer to the war gods for Halvar to find his way home safely. Though he said little to me, I knew the stable hand was a favorite among the other serfs at the state, and he'd only been indentured for half a turn. After the patrol passed, I sprinted down the back roads until I found the loose board in the wooden gate separating the shanties from the upper Mellstrand. Snake grass and wild roses snagged my tattered jacket as I climbed the slopes to the villas and overseeing estates. When my legs had been poked and prodded, scraped and mangled by the brambles, I arrived at the iron gate of the Lysander estate. Trimmed in lawns and quaint wood and wattle log houses dotted the surrounding knolls near the white center manor. Made of pearl stone, the estate sang of prestige, of royalty. I ducked into the hedgerow and carefully inched toward the back for the cellar. Knots formed in my gut. Along the curve of the brick drive, the handsome cabs and cabriolets with velvet curtains parked at the main entrance. Lyres and lutes sang out a sweet melody from inside. I let out a sigh of frustration. The cellar was 20 paces around the corner, and if I wanted to make it inside without being caught, it was the only entrance to take. I turned back into the tangles of trees and trekked the distance to the lawns nearer to the cellar. The closest unit of Raven Guards was at least 30 paces away, but they were a risk. Trained to strike first, ask questions later. The regal blue, black, and white paint on their faces gleamed into the lantern light. A way to look more like the warriors of the gods. Rooms hung from talesmen on thick beards and battle axes on their belts. The guards looked ready for war, not protectors of a wealthy feat. I held my breath until blood throbbed in my head. When the guards turned about face in the opposite direction, I darted across the soft lawn. At the cellar door, my pulse thumped as I struggled with the master key. With my missing fingertips, the key fell. Curses rolled out with my breath as I snatched it up and toppled onto the root cellar, where the kitchen serfs spent most of their days. I winced as my knees scraped across the river stone floor. Then I scurried to slam the door. Voices rumbled through the thick wood. I didn't move, didn't breathe. "Did you hear anything?" I guessed a guard stood maybe 10 paces away. "Nothing. Shall we alert Kvinna Lysander?" a second patrol replied. The first guard scoffed. "Please, be my guest and disturb the master when we have no intruder in custody. Bleeding gods, the man is on his deathbed, and your first thought to disturb him. Could have slipped inside, and all I'm saying is he'd want to know." The handle rattled on the cellar hatch. "Lock tight, you bleeding fool." For what felt like 100 breathless moments, the guards inspected the door, until at long last the chains on their boots clinked as the guards marched away, insulting each other as they went. I released a rattled breath and swallowed bile back into my gut. The cellar was murky, and the pungent scent of damp soil and starch burned my nostrils. Boxes lined the arched stone walls, and only the light of the pale moon burst into blue shadows through the windows. I'd done it! Well, halfway. I still needed to slip into the main halls without being seen. It was a fool's dream. Before I'd finished standing, fingernails dug into the meat of my arms and dragged me out from behind my crate. I stumbled, nearly falling forward. 2 figures blocked my way. Sharp, narrowed eyes met mine. But the most worrisome was the knife at my throat. "Kvinna Elise," the girl holding the knife grumbled. "We've been looking for you."